Welcome back to our study called More Than You Can Think. We're looking at Genesis 17 today, and we're in verses 19 through 22. This section called Marvelous, Infinite, Matchless Grace. Yes, that's a line from a song. But that's exactly what we're talking about. Marvelous, infinite, matchless grace of God. The first thing I think from these verses we want to look at is the idea of no. See, God listens to Abraham's suggestion, but then he gives him what Christian comedian Tim Hawkins says is the gift of no. He has a whole bit on how he gives his kids the gift of no. They're always asking stuff, and he gives them no, gives them the gift of no. That's what God does here to Abraham. Abraham says something, he says, okay, how about Ishmael? You want to use Ishmael for the plan? And God says no. Often God's gracious answer to our prayers is a firm no. That's what we need. Ishmael would not be the one to fulfill the promise, but as we will see, he won't be just cast aside and forgotten either. But the no of God comes because God's plan will not be thwarted, and our prayers do not change the plan of God. Let me say that again. Our prayers do not change the plan of God. Do we understand that? Because a lot of people don't. I think they think that if I pray, God will do what I want him to do, like he's some kind of divine butler or something. So if I tell God what I want, then he's going to change his plans to make that happen. Well, God has a plan. He set the plan in motion before he created anything, before the foundation of the world. It's a plan somewhere out there in eternity. However you figure that out, however you make sense of that in your own brain, that's up to you. But so in eternity, he has a plan. And that plan is what's occurring right now. Reality that we live in is the plan. This is the plan. So, our prayers in time here will not affect the plan. Now, he's chosen in his plan to use our prayers. And when someone's prayed, then he does something. But that's in his plan. That's not because, oh, wow, I didn't even think about that. God's not sitting up there doing that. He's, oh, man, I can't believe that they prayed. Now I got to change my plan. There's no A, B, C, D, E, F, G plans. There's one plan. So our prayers don't change it, but they're used by God, which is an amazing thing, that he would choose to use the prayers of his people to affect change in the universe. But that was his plan. So, that is the idea here. Our prayers do not change God. And Abraham's prayers won't change God. He's by saying to God, hey, how about Ishmael? God's not like, oh yeah, let me change my plan. No. You know, oftentimes we receive God's no to our prayers because what we're asking from God is too small. God has a plan of amazingness. And we're asking for the cheap seats. You know, we could have a box. We could have free food. We could have everything that we want. A perfect view of the game, but what we're looking for is the nosebleed sections behind the pillar. You know, why do we when we get that, we're like, wow, at least I'm in the game. I mean, this is great. You know, but really, what we're settling for good things. We settle for good things, but what we should be asking for is the greatest things. I mean, to have Ishmael was good. To have Ishmael have a son was a good thing, but God has something far greater in his mind for Abraham and for Sarah. But he was just kind of settling. Well, he got Ishmael, so what more do you want? That's kind of what Abraham did. So, but here again, Abraham hears the statement of God. No, Sarah will have a child. Sarah will have a child. He repeats it. God has to go back and say, no, Sarah's going to have a child. I know what you said, but Sarah's going to have a kid. Don't worry. So the promises go to Sarah's son. The next thing that God promises is that the covenant promises would pass to Sarah's son, and his lines of descendants would pass the covenant on and on and on. That's how it worked. That's what God promises here. God has chosen Isaac, not Ishmael. Sorry, my Muslim friends, but that's what the Bible says. That's what the Old Testament says. They have the different view, obviously. But even though Ishmael was born first, and his culture and nature would dictate that he should be the chosen heir, God chooses the younger one. This is not the last time that God will choose against what human reason would say. That's what God does. He will choose Jacob, not Esau. He will favor Ephraim over Manasseh, who was the firstborn of Joseph. He has chosen what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. He's chosen the weak to shame the strong. He chose the low, the despised, the not, to bring to nothing things that are. See, the book of Genesis has this theme of God's choosing, His choice running throughout. It is His prerogative to choose whom He will and to pass by whom He will. That's what the Bible states. That's what we see. He can choose Ishmael if He wants to, or He could choose Isaac. He chooses Isaac. He could choose both of them, right? He doesn't do that. He chooses just Isaac and gives Ishmael some blessings. See, He gives Ishmael blessings because He's heard, and what He says is He hears Abraham. I have heard you, He says. So this doesn't mean that Ishmael is completely disregarded, even though Isaac is the chosen one. Ishmael is not just thrown into the garbage pile of history. God says that as for Ishmael, I have heard you. It's an obvious play on words because remember, Ishmael means God hears. And so God says, I hear you about me hearing you. There's a reason why He's named God hears. I hear. So God gives Ishmael some temporal earthly blessings. He doesn't pass the spiritual, the amazing covenant blessings that He's promised Abraham to Ishmael, but He does give him some earthly blessings. The blessings that Ishmael receives sound a lot like the blessing upon mankind, that they would be fruitful and multiply. Yet God also promises that He would be a father of 12 princes, and they would become a great nation. So that's nothing to sneeze at, It's not something to just disregard. That's a big deal. God promises that Ishmael would be a nation, a father of nations. There would be 12 princes in his line. So we see that his line is still alive today, right? So obviously God was right. God promised. God came through with them. And many of those people who would be in Ishmael's line would come to faith, would come faith in the true God, would find Christ. So promises are true. What God says has come to be, and God blesses. He has His own plan. He knows what He's doing. You can't thwart God's plan. You can't pray God out of His plan. Can't do that. But your prayers are in His plan, which is amazing to think about. And God hears. God hears. He won't just disregard. Just because Ishmael wasn't part of the covenant promise doesn't mean that God still wouldn't take care of him. So that's the mercy, the amazingness of God's grace, giving that blessing to Ishmael, even though he didn't deserve it. Same thing with Isaac. He didn't deserve it. He hasn't done anything yet, and he's already got the promises. So that's something we need to learn. God has His own prerogative. God can choose what He wants. He can choose whom He wants. He does that. That's what He does. The Bible makes it clear. You read the Old Testament, you see that for certain. God chooses, does what He wants to do. So learn these lessons this week, and come back next time, and we'll look at the last section.